It's rather hard to recall exactly what was going through, but I do remember when we were on the surface of the moon, actually when we were outside, the sort of nebulous thought coming to me, and that's sort of an unusual...
You were aware of that?
I was quite aware that we were being watched.
When Buzz Aldrin stepped off the lunar lander, he made history. When he stepped back onto Earth, he was never the same. He called the mission a success, but his voice hinted at something deeper, something unsettling.
I saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars. We were smart enough to not say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us. Technically, it becomes an unidentified flying object.
In interviews, his voice would tense, his eyes shift, and at times, he struggled to find words, until one day he quietly said, "The moon is not what you think." Now, decades later, new scientific findings are beginning to support what he felt up there. The interview that broke his silence. Buzz Aldrin, the second man to set foot on the moon, sat across from a reporter and answered the same old questions during a televised interview commemorating the 11th anniversary of Apollo 11. The cameras were rolling, the lights were bright, and the team was expecting yet another serene tale of humanity's initial steps on another planet. However, an unforeseen event transpired. He remained speechless for a few seconds as his hands froze and tears welled up in his eyes in response to the reporter's question about the moon's continued significance in his life. He then murmured, "The moon is not what you think," in a low, unsteady voice. Fearing she didn't know what to say, the reporter paused. Nothing was heard in the control room. It was unexpected for a man who had become the pinnacle of human accomplishment to feel this way all of a sudden. Neither did Aldrin try to downplay the situation. Like he was recalling something too heavy to put into words, he just reclined in his chair and averted his gaze. The individuals that were present reported that the atmosphere in the studio changed in an instant. Although he had been a symbol of victory in the past, the once confident hero appeared to be feeble, terrified, and disoriented now. Even so, he was accompanied by others. According to those who have watched Buzz Aldrin's most recent moon talks, his feelings frequently strike them by surprise. His voice shakes, or his eyes flood up with tears whenever he begins to talk about the landing in interviews. According to reporters who have observed his past talks, his tone changes immediately after he mentions the moon. The fact that he sounds both proud and anxious at various points in time suggests that the memories are more significant than he gives the impression they are. He described the eerie silence that pervaded the lunar surface in an interview that took place in 2019, and his voice trembled as he did so. While explaining Earth from space, his former co-workers said that he would occasionally stop in the middle of a sentence, as if he were trying to find the appropriate words, but was unable to do so. This occurred even in private circumstances. People who are closest to Buzz Aldrin claim that he has two sides to his personality. Consistently advocating new space missions and highlighting the field's potential future, he exhibits self-control and excitement while simultaneously communicating to the general public. However, when he is by himself, he appears to be more introverted and reflective, as if a portion of him had fled to the moon and never returned. Many people all across the world are still perplexed as a result of the comment that was so succinct. Was it regret, transparency, or caution that led to this? It was completely dark for everyone. However, the solution is not included in the interview of any kind. We need to go back to the beginning, to the mission that propelled him further than any other human had ever gone before, in order to make sense of that voice that is shaking. If we're to make sense of that trembling voice, we can't stay in the studio. We have to go back to the surface of the moon, and to the moment something changed in him forever. The launch that left no room for error. At Florida's Kennedy Space Center in July 1969, thousands of people watched as cameras from all over the globe zeroed in on a single rocket. With their microphones at the ready, reporters crowded the press stands, anticipating the start of history. Constructed at a height of 363 feet, the Saturn V was the most powerful rocket in history. A mission to an uncharted location was being carried out by the Apollo 11 spacecraft, which was not the spacecraft itself, but rather the launcher that sent it beyond Earth. The mission was being carried out by three men: Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin. There was no element of chance or hope involved in the Apollo 11 mission. To finish it required a significant amount of time, work, and making a calculated risk. Over 300,000 scientists, engineers, and technicians put in a lot of hard work to make it a reality. The control switches, the circuits, and the bolts had all been examined for a significant number of times. Because of a single malfunction, the rocket and its crew are rendered completely useless. It was completely clear to the group of people working on the program that there was a fraction of a second that separated success and failure. Early on the morning of July 16th, the astronauts arrived at Launch Complex 39A, which was the location of their arrival. They were wearing white pressure suits and helmets, and as they boarded the elevator that would take them to the heart of the rocket, they gave a short wave to the cameras. In the control module, which was crammed with screens, switches, and wires, they were affixed to chairs that were too small and crowded. During the 2 hours that they were seated with their seats fastened, technicians did final inspections while the sound of fuel lines hissing beneath them was audible. The clock on the globe started to tick down the seconds as they arrived. At 9:32 in the morning, they kicked off their day. The Earth began to shake, and flames began to shoot out. As soon as the rocket's foundation detonated, the enormous rumble moved buildings that were located many miles distant. The rocket began to climb gradually, and soon it reached a speed that was sufficient for it to disappear from view. After the vibration had begun to lessen, Mission Control immediately proceeded to space. An Apollo 11 launch was about to take place. When the tremors stopped, the only sound that could be heard inside the spacecraft was the faint buzzing of the systems that were responsible for keeping the crew alive. The individuals on the crew watched in astonishment as the first stage simply separated from the second stage. The speed of the spaceship had increased to approximately 24,000 miles per hour by the time the S-4B stage was fired for the first explosion. During the time when the astronauts were using telemetry to complete system checks, controllers were monitoring the data in real time. The possibility of a single mistake still exists for everything. There was no change in Aldrin's heart rate as the spacecraft moved away from the gravitational pull of Earth, according to the mission logs. They traveled through free space for a period of 3 days on their way to the Moon. The Earth shrunk until it resembled a shiny marble, and they observed it from their window as it happened. Day by day, the Moon grew larger and larger. In every reading, the mission seemed to be proceeding as planned, despite the fact that it was a challenging and protracted journey. They were on the verge of accomplishing something that would take the world by storm, and everyone was waiting for the news. It took Apollo 11 76 hours to reach lunar orbit after it had arrived there. The crew was able to see the Moon filling the glass in front of them as they stared out of the window. They were at last in the position that they had desired. In order to go to the subsequent step, the level of risk would at its peak. Landing in a secure manner was their only viable alternative. The calculations, the number of hours spent in training, and the risks would all be put to the test now that we are on our way to the surface. But reaching the moon was only half the journey. What came next would push the astronauts to their limits and nearly derail the mission at the very moment the world held its breath, alone in the quiet of the moon. Radio communication with Earth ceased once Apollo 11 touched down on the moon's far side. There was total solitude for the three men in the spacecraft for a short while. No pulse, no signals from the command center. No one had ever been so far away from every other living soul before in human history. Even the normally boisterous cabin crew fell silent, according to mission records. Under no circumstances would anyone on Earth be able to provide assistance to the astronauts in the event that something occurred during those minutes. The steady, composed voices of the astronauts were audible to mission control as soon as contact was re-established. It was beginning to get close to the time when the next step would begin. The astronauts Armstrong and Aldrin were the ones who entered the Eagle, the lunar module. Collins remained in the command module and continued to orbit by himself, while the other two were getting set to embark on their descent. According to reports, the two spacecraft were able to split without any problems. As soon as the Eagle started its powered descent, computer alarms started going off everywhere. On the onboard system, when it was overloaded, a series of unexpected warning codes displayed all at once. To determine whether or not the mission could proceed, engineers back on Earth made a mad scramble. Armstrong was able to physically steer the fall by using the controls that were located within the cabin. Aldrin made the announcement of the height and speed in a mechanical manner. We were reaching the end of our fuel supply. They were going to be involved in a collision if the engine stopped working too rapidly. Because of the radio, everyone in Houston was able to hear them breathing. The lander was successfully leveled by Armstrong after he found a place that was level and had less than 30 seconds of fuel left. Finally, his calming voice could be heard through the static. The Eagle has successfully landed at Houston Tranquility Base. Numerous engineers shed tears, yelled, and applauded in response. Upon the beginning of live coverage on television networks all over the world, millions of people expressed their sheer joy. On the other hand, the lunar module had its own atmosphere that was completely different from ours. Two gentlemen glanced down at the drab surface that lay below them as they looked out of the small window. Complete and utter silence, with neither a breeze nor any other sound present. A serene and unruffled scene that extends off into the distance and remains calm throughout. After the touchdown, it is believed that Armstrong and Aldrin sat in silence for a significant amount of time before beginning the post-landing checklist. In hindsight, Aldrin described the experience as being both eerie and exciting, as if they had arrived in a region that none of them had ever been before. He said that it was as if they had arrived in a brand new place. An underhanded request was made to the mission control team by Aldrin before he went outside. The one and only thing that he needed was a short amount of time to do a certain particular ritual. After a quick prayer and a few drops of wine from a small communion kit that his church had provided, he took it out of his flight bag and set it aside. He then said a further brief prayer. In spite of the fact that it was only a few seconds long, it was nonetheless a significant turning point in the course of history. This was the very first religious ritual that had ever been carried out on a celestial body in the history of the worldwide community. In his judgment, Aldrin intended to communicate his appreciation in a manner that was honest and genuine before he started on an undertaking that had never been attempted before. In spite of the fact that the upcoming action would be recorded in history, it would also force Aldrin to confront an entity that is completely incomprehensible to individuals who are knowledgeable in the scientific field. A planet that is devoid of all forms of life and is filled with a palpable sense of quiet. The first footsteps into nothingness. Buzz Aldrin braced himself for a breathtaking panorama as he descended the stairway of the lunar module. Emptiness, on the other hand, was what he encountered. Fine dust clung to everything on the flat, gray surface. Nothing moved. There was no sound. It seemed as though the horizon was unusually close, and for an odd second he felt as though he were not on a planet at all, but rather inside a gigantic bowl. Those who had envisioned a picturesque scene were mistaken. It was unpleasant, since it was harsh and colorless. Aldrin's boots left behind pristine traces in the dust, and it is highly likely that these tracks will remain there for centuries to come. During the time that Armstrong was preparing the camera and flag, he cautiously explored the neighborhood in order to examine the surface. When he listened to the Houston voices over his earpiece, they appeared vague and distant, as if they had been transported from another age. According to the logs of the mission, Aldrin made a private remark to himself on the peculiar texture of the soil and the heavy shadows that were present. The beams of the sun, which were not filtered out by the clouds, were almost blinding. The sky above, on the other hand, was completely devoid of light. There was not a single star that could be seen over the vastness of the night sky. As soon as Armstrong set foot on the surface, the two men immediately began arranging the apparatus used for tests and photographs. At each and every step, you need to exercise extreme caution. Dust was kicked up with each step, and it descended back down to the ground immediately afterward, never to float. Everything seemed to be motionless, as if time had stopped moving altogether, because there was no wind blowing. Even when they spoke to one another, their voices came across as mechanical and hollow from the radio. The moon appeared to be more of a foreign world than it was a planet, according to what Aldrin revealed after the fact. Aldrin uttered the words that would eternally define him in those very first moments of his life. The utter absence of anything. This one sentence encapsulated his entire emotional condition from beginning to end. It appeared as though there were no indications of life in the countryside, despite the fact that it was extremely large. Standing there, he was aware that it was a place that was devoid of any and all life. There is a location that has not changed in a very long time. Every stride that he took gave the impression that he was breaking the silence that had been prevailing over the universe since the beginning of time. The blue and white lights of Earth could be seen against the background of emptiness when Aldrin looked up at the planet, which was suspended in the dark sky. Because of its small size and brittleness, it was almost delicate. Interviews that were performed many years later provided evidence that sight had a significant impact on his outlook on life. A single dazzling ball would be able to contain every single person on the planet if it were to be placed at that distance. In the midst of the territories, the battles, and the clamor of civilization, a tranquil dot emerged. After some time had passed, he pondered on that period of time and remarked that it was during that time that he acknowledged that exploration encompassed more than simply discovering unknown areas. It was about coming to terms with the fact that our lives are fleeting and that our existence is of little value. Nevertheless, that enormous, horrible quiet, that silence, followed him home and refused to leave, even while the entire world rejoiced upon his arrival. The silence that followed him home. The Apollo 11 astronauts were greeted with heroism upon their return to Earth. Parades in Chicago and New York City spanned miles. Television cameras followed their every move as flags waved and fans shouted. From the open rear of an automobile, Buzz Aldrin's silver astronaut outfit gleamed in the June light as he grinned and waved. He appeared proud on the outside. Deep down, he remained rooted to that desolate planet. Nothing could fill the space he had left behind, not even the clamor of the throng. Aldrin underwent the rituals that all national heroes must endure in the weeks following the mission. He was honored with honors, interacted with presidents, and delivered speeches. Along with experts, generals, and aspiring astronauts, he shook hands with youngsters. Somehow, though, something had changed about him, according to those who knew him back then. He started to give shorter responses during interviews. At gatherings, he would frequently withdraw to a corner and stare vacantly into space. According to some of his friends, he would often be found sitting alone in his room late at night, lost in thought, as if he were far away. Colleagues said that even in a business context, Aldrin occasionally appeared disengaged. In contrast to Armstrong and Collins, Aldrin frequently gave the impression that he was fidgeting with the press. Although he was courteous, he kept his distance and seemed to daydream throughout chats. Some of his closest friends later claimed they thought he was troubled more by his understanding than by what he actually saw. All the worldly concerns have been washed away by the moon. Upon returning home, the mundane world seems surreal. Being famous made that sensation even worse. Everyone was waiting for him to paint a picture of the moon, but he was at a loss for words. He had previously stated that he found it impossible to explain to others because they just couldn't grasp the significance of the silence. For many, it was an illustrious location. It served as a stark reminder of how insignificant humans truly were in his eyes. Returning to mundane things like grocery stores and traffic lights might be challenging after witnessing eternity, he explained to a reporter afterwards. He was having a hard time adjusting to life in the spotlight after the world had praised his journey. For the following many years, Aldrin struggled with despair and what he would later term a feeling of loss. The mission was over, but he returned home to find that the silence had followed. Multiple sources state that he stayed up all night mentally reliving the landing. According to his friends, he would occasionally look up at the sky as if he were looking for something he had forgotten. Two parts of his personality were apparent to them: the scientifically minded engineer and the philosophically curious philosopher. Later conversations with Aldrin revealed his true feelings about never leaving the moon. According to him, it's always there, just behind your eyes. Even after all these years, he still whispered those 6 words, the same emotion that devastated him. You are mistaken about the moon. For a long time, people thought those were metaphors. But then scientific discoveries started to show that Aldrin might have been correct. The moon is not what you think. Apollo 11 was the first spacecraft to return to the moon in almost half a century. On this occasion, neither rockets nor astronauts were being used. Computers, satellites, and AI were all part of their strategy. Strong software was used to rescan and analyze the historical data, images, and rock samples from the Apollo era. Scientists began to doubt nearly all of their prior assumptions in light of the results produced by the machines. Surprisingly, it validated Buzz Aldrin's feelings from the day he stood on that gray surface. Instruments left behind by the Apollo crews were one of the initial sources of surprise. Mini moonquakes triggered by asteroids were detected by seismometers in the 1970s. Something seemed off when researchers revisited that data set some years later. The vibrations didn't go away as fast as they would on Earth after each impact with the moon. For about 30 minutes, they resounded. The noise was compared by NASA engineers to a bell-like ring. The anomalous behavior indicated that the lunar interior was not solid, unlike Earth's. It could be somewhat hollow or have layers that alter the way sound travels. The moon's structure was obviously much more peculiar than anybody had anticipated, regardless of the rationale. The next big thing was when we found a way to connect the moon to Earth. New isotope analysis techniques allowed scientists to match the lunar rock's chemical composition to those of materials found deep within the Earth. It was almost a perfect match. The moon couldn't be grabbed from orbit because of this. It originated on Earth. The moon formed from fragments of our planet that were thrown into orbit by a tremendous collision that occurred billions of years ago. Our loved ones are circling us, not an unknown individual. New robotic missions resumed surface surveying as technology improved. In order to probe the subsurface, the Chandrayaan-3 lander from India and the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter from the United States of America utilized radar and spectrometers. Tiny glass beads, created by long-gone volcanic eruptions, were discovered. Trace amounts of water, preserved for eons, were included within the beads. This suggests that the moon's interior may still contain chemical energy, as scientists think these originated from deep within the moon. Proof that this world was once dynamic and full of life. In 2023, AI had a role in providing fresh insights from previously collected Apollo data. Algorithms detected weak magnetic patterns in lunar rocks, demonstrating that the moon's magnetic field was once generated by a molten core. A heart, similar to Earth's, once pounded within it. Radar imaging of the opposite side uncovered mountain-sized metal objects underneath, possibly the remains of asteroids that collided with Earth eons ago. We now view the moon differently as a result of all these discoveries. This is not a lifeless rock floating aimlessly in space. It is an evolving part of Earth's history, a fragment of a larger whole that continues to mirror our humanity. It appeared like Buzz Aldrin knew that even before the data was available. The moon is not what you imagine was not a mystery. He meant it as a direct statement. He was elucidating a reality that scientists have only recently started to grasp. We are the moon, and the moon is us. The way scientists perceive the moon has been transformed by all these new findings. Its previous image as a lifeless rock orbiting Earth has faded. The latest findings indicate that it once had life, complete with heat, motion, and activity, and that it originated from the same place as our planet. Even before the data confirmed it, Buzz Aldrin appeared to sense it. There was no air of secrecy behind his statement that the moon is not what it seems. He was outlining an elementary reality. Earth and the moon are inseparable. Insights into one have perpetually influenced the other. If science needed 50 years to catch up to what he felt in a single moment, then perhaps the real question isn't what the moon is made of, but what it meant to the man who stood on it. How one moment redefined exploration. Through his platform, Aldrin was able to alter people's perspectives on exploration. He was one of the few Apollo astronauts who survived. At the same time that he encouraged younger generations of astronauts to get their heads ready, he also encouraged them to get their equipment ready. It was his warning that space may put a person's sense of purpose to the test just as much as their physical abilities. NASA was able to develop new psychiatric programs for astronauts who were on extended trips as a result of his candor regarding the mental toll of returning to Earth after such a journey. The organization started looking into not only how humans are able to survive in space, but also how they are able to adjust to their new environment once they return home. Additionally, Aldrin emerged as a forceful advocate for international cooperation, and cooperation that transcends national boundaries. He held the conviction that the moon should never be owned by a single nation or flag. He believed this since he was a child. In his lectures, He referred to it as the common ground of the universe, which was a place that served to remind people of the things that they were capable of doing when they collaborated with one another. Through the words that he made in public, he conveyed his support for the Artemis program offered by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, as well as the global efforts to construct a permanent base on the Moon. In his opinion, the subsequent stage of discovery was not about fighting against one another, but rather about cooperating with one another. His ideas were not only implemented in the field of science, but they were also implemented in educational institutions and museums all around the world. Teachers incorporated his comments into their courses in order to inspire students to think about things that go beyond the sphere of technology and to see discovery as a moral responsibility. His word, magnificent desolation, has served as a source of inspiration for painters, filmmakers, and writers who have sought to express the beauty and loneliness of human achievement. The story of Apollo developed into something that was more than just history. It reached the level of philosophy as a result of Aldrin's contributions. When Aldrin was in his latter years, he frequently stated that the most important thing he learned on the Moon was about the Earth itself. It was from space that he witnessed the fragility of our world, which appeared to be little, brilliant, and alone. Exploration ought to make us better stewards of the world that we currently possess. He reminded people of this fact. His tears were not an expression of sadness. Rather, they intended to serve as a warning, a reminder, and a hope. In the end, Aldrin didn't just walk on the Moon. He brought something back that no instrument could measure. What do you think stayed with him? And do you believe some experiences are too vast for words? Share your thoughts below.